Good afternoon. Welcome to today's hearing on developing and using evidence-based solutions in SNAP. We will explore what kind of research is needed to develop more evidence-based solutions and what can be done to improve the quality and quantity of data and how research can be used to improve the program. This is the 7th in our past, present, and future of SNAP series. We'll build on themes presented throughout the series and provisions included in the 2014 Farm Bill. I just want to interrupt here really quickly to let you know that we are going to have votes. We understand that, but the reason I'm trying to move timely is to get to our panel and ask you to be timely as well so that we can get as much done as we can before votes are called. As we continue these discussions, I want to reiterate this process is not just about the bureaucracy behind SNAP. It's about helping people. We're here to ensure people get a job, support their family, and ultimately become financially independent. We've repeatedly heard calls for more flexibility so that both governmental and non-governmental organizations can better serve recipients. As we work to make that possibility a reality, we must also be mindful of our duty to be good stewards of hard-earned taxpayer dollars. Giving more flexibility must be accompanied by measures that provide for robust accountability, oversight, and feedback. This will ultimately protect recipients and ensure taxpayer dollars are well spent. Unfortunately, most of the research currently funded by the Department of Agriculture revolves around the process, like application timing and accuracy and recipient characteristics such as gender, age, and family composition. This approach misses the forest through the trees. Instead, the department must move beyond the basics of measuring the quote-unquote number served and develop new data points that focus on outcomes like well-being, changes in earnings, and family stability. This shifts the conversation from, quote, serving the most to, quote, being the best. Leads to better outcomes for people because we're better able to judge what works and what doesn't. Measuring outcomes is not a new concept. In fact, in our third hearing on the role of the charitable sector, Jonathan Webb with Feed the Children suggested developing a set of outcome measures similar to those used in international food aid programs. The 2014 Farm Bill planted the seeds of an outcome-based approach. The much-discussed SNAP work pilots allow 10 states to test various approaches to serving recipients. In exchange for a share of federal funds, they must agree to comprehensive external evaluation aimed at measuring increases in employment and overall household incomes. The pilots' emphasis on outcomes was a great bipartisan step forward to promote innovation and flexibility and strong accountability. I look forward to monitoring the process of these pilots as they will help to provide a window into what works and what doesn't so that limited taxpayer dollars can be used effectively as possible in providing a safety net to those in need and means to climbing the economic ladder. Thank you to all of our witnesses for being here today, and I'm anticipating a great discussion. I would now like to recognize Ranking Member McGovern for his opening statement.
Thank you very much, Chairwoman Walorski, for holding today's hearing, and thank you to the witnesses for being with us. I look forward to your testimony. This is our 7th hearing on SNAP, and I still have a lot of questions as to where all this is headed. We're told that the purpose of all these hearings is to make SNAP better. No program is perfect. There's always room for improvement. But I worry that for some of my colleagues, improvement is code for cuts. It makes me nervous that we're going down a path that I worry could actually make hunger worse in this country. You know, in past hearings, we've heard a lot about case management. Well, I'm all for case management, but show me the money. Case management is expensive, and no one's talking about increasing SNAP funding to pay for it. We shouldn't take money away from the food benefit to pay for case management. We shouldn't rob Peter to pay Paul. Likewise, we've heard a lot about work requirements, but SNAP is not a jobs program. It's a food program. If my friends who are critics of this program want to talk about jobs, then we should talk about how our job training programs are woefully underfunded. There seems to be little appetite to provide more money there, too. Today's hearing is about SNAP and the evidence. Well, let's look at the evidence. According to USDA data, SNAP enrollment is at the lowest level it's been in nearly 4 years. SNAP caseloads are coming down from their peak in the middle of one of the country's worst recessions, and they're expected to continue to decline. That's how the program is designed to work, and it's working. We also have evidence from Children's Health Watch that receiving SNAP is associated with important health outcomes for children. Children whose families received SNAP were less likely to be food insecure, less likely to be underweight, and less likely to be at risk of developmental delays. If we're talking about investing in our future, I can't think of a better investment than making sure that our kids have enough to eat. One of the things that frustrates me a little bit about some of the hearings that we've had is that we haven't heard directly from anybody at the Food and Nutrition Service at USDA, those directly responsible for administering SNAP. I understand FNS is a whole team doing research on evidence-based outcomes on SNAP. It would seem to me that we should be hearing from them directly. And if we're focusing on evidence, we should look at the body of evidence that shows the SNAP benefit is too low, that people run out of money to pay for groceries mid-month and have to turn to food pantries and food banks to feed them through the end of the month. We should be looking at the evidence that shows that more and more seniors are experiencing hunger. Seniors are the population with the most number of folks who are eligible for SNAP but who aren't enrolled. Why isn't that? Why is that? Is it because they don't know that they're eligible? Is it that they're ashamed to ask for help? We should be examining those issues more closely, and we also ought to be looking at hunger among our veterans. These are the men and women who bravely fought for our country, and I don't think we're doing enough to support them. They and their families have sacrificed a great deal. So today's hearing is about evidence, and the evidence shows us that SNAP works. SNAP is helping millions of struggling families around the country put food on the table, and as this economy improves, more and more people are getting back on their feet and off of SNAP. SNAP is working, and my hope that this committee will look for ways to strengthen it so that we can continue to give families a hand up when they need it. I yield back my time.
Thank you, Mr. McGovern. The Chair would request that other members submit their opening statements for the record so the witness may begin their testimony, and to ensure there's ample time for questions. The Chair would also like to notify members they'll be recognized for questioning in order of seniority for members who are here at the start of the hearing. After that, members will be recognized in order of arrival. I appreciate the members' understanding. Witnesses are reminded to limit their oral statements to 5 minutes. All of the written statements will be included for the record. And I would like to now welcome our witnesses to the table. John Barron, Vice President of Evidence-Based Policy, Laura and John Arnold Foundation, Washington, D.C. James Weill, President, Food and Research and Action Center, Washington, D.C. Special welcome to James Sullivan, Associate Professor of Economics, University of Notre Dame, and Wilson Sheehan Lab for Economic Opportunity, Notre Dame, Indiana. It's my honor to introduce Dr. James Sullivan, Associate Professor of Economics at the University of Notre Dame. Dr. Sullivan has been at Notre Dame since 2002, researching poverty and the effects of anti-poverty programs in the U.S. In 2012, Dr. Sullivan co-founded the Lab for Economic Opportunities, which partners with Catholic Charities to find research-driven solutions to poverty. Dr. Sullivan, thanks for your testimony. Appreciate it before this committee today. Thank you for your continued efforts to find research-based solutions to poverty in the United States. Next, I would like to recognize Chairman Conaway to introduce the final member of the panel.
Well, thank you, Julie. It's my pleasure to introduce Jeremy Everett. Jeremy's dad and I are good friends. Jeremy's the founding director of the Texas Hunger Initiative at Baylor University. Under his leadership, THI thinks outside the box to develop and implement true public-private partnerships with all levels of government and types of community-based organizations to reduce hunger in Texas and beyond. He's also in town this week because he's currently serving on the National Commission on Hunger, which was created by Congress in 2014. I've heard that they had a great hearing yesterday, and that we look forward to recommendations from that effort later in the year. Jeremy's been doing important research-based work in this space for a long time, and we're honored to have him here today to hear from him. And in spite of what our ranking member said, who else he wanted to hear from, we are excited about hearing from these witnesses today because they are the ones that are with us. And with that, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Barron, please begin your testimony when you're ready.
Okay, thank you. The SNAP program. I'm testifying on behalf of the Laura and John Arnold Foundation. My testimony will first discuss how evidence-based reforms in other entitlement programs, such as welfare and unemployment insurance, have identified several highly effective strategies for increasing participant success in finding employment while simultaneously reducing government spending. Then I will offer some concrete ideas for advancing similar reforms within SNAP. In welfare policy in the 1980s and 1990s, a large number of randomized controlled trials of state and local welfare-to-work programs were conducted across the United States. Such studies are widely considered the gold standard method of evaluating program effectiveness, and this was the first time that such rigorous randomized methods were deployed on a large scale in social spending instead of the usual evaluation methods, which often produce much less reliable answers. Some of the welfare studies found modest effects. Some of them found no effects. But one trial in Riverside County, California in the late 1980s of a work-focused welfare-to-work program was a blockbuster. The program was found to increase employment and earnings of welfare participants by 40% over 5 years for single-parent long-term welfare recipients compared to the control group, and to produce net savings to the taxpayer of over $20 million for the countywide by reducing their use of welfare and food stamps. Around the same time, a different randomized controlled trial in Los Angeles of their Welfare to Work program, which provided remedial education to welfare recipients, found no meaningful effects. Based on these findings, Los Angeles scrapped its program, borrowed the key elements of the Work First Riverside model, and implemented it countywide in Los Angeles County. When the Los Angeles program was tested in a subsequent randomized controlled trial, it was found, lo and behold, to produce impressive effects, about a 25% increase in employment and earnings, and net savings to the taxpayer of about $30 million. Riverside and Los Angeles and several similar studies that followed had a major influence on national welfare policy, helping to build the political consensus for the work requirements in the 1996 Welfare Reform Act. In my written testimony, I describe a randomized trial in a different entitlement program, unemployment insurance, UI, that has recently identified a highly effective strategy developed by the state of Nevada for assisting UI claimants to find employment. Now, in SNAP, building similar evidence-based solutions that produce important improvements in participants' lives is possible. The Agriculture Department's 10-state pilot program that you referred to, Madam Chairwoman, recently is a valuable step, and it was great to see that program is using randomized trials to evaluate the 10 different state pilots. But to build a body of proven effective strategies within SNAP, as in welfare, will require a much larger effort and specifically strategic trial and error. In other words, rigorously testing many promising reforms to identify the few that are effective. The instances of effectiveness that I just described in welfare and UI are exceptions that have emerged from testing a much larger pool of strategies. More generally, most innovations, typically 80 to 90%, are found to produce weak or no positive effects when rigorously evaluated, a pattern that occurs not just in social spending, but in other fields where randomized trials have been carried out, including medicine and business. Now, my written testimony offers several concrete suggestions to greatly accelerate the rate of innovation and rigorous evaluation in SNAP, and to do it in a cost-effective way. First, we suggest that the federal government incentivize states to use their existing funds for SNAP employment and training to rigorously evaluate new employment and training strategies. One important incentive, similar to welfare, what was done in welfare, would be to allow states to share in any budget savings that result from an employment and training strategy that is demonstrated through a rigorous evaluation to be effective. Another incentive also used in welfare would be for the federal government to fund half the cost of these state-level evaluations, with states funding the other half. Our second main recommendation, designed to maximize the number of strategies that can be evaluated within a given budget, would be to use low-cost randomized trials as a main evaluation method, and my written testimony describes how such methods are increasingly possible in social spending by using administrative data to measure the outcomes. In conclusion, there is every reason to believe that with robust state-level innovation and rigorous evaluation in SNAP, we can succeed in identifying highly effective strategies for increasing workforce success and self-sufficiency of program participants.
Thank you, Mr. Barron. Mr. Weill, please proceed with your testimony.
Chairwoman Walorski, Ranking Member McGovern, members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to testify this afternoon. I'm Jim Weill, President of the Food Research and Action Center, commonly known as FRAC, and for 45 years, FRAC has worked to implement and strengthen SNAP and other nutrition and anti-poverty programs in order to reduce hunger and improve nutrition and well-being. My written testimony details the very extensive body of evidence that already shows how successful SNAP is in reducing hunger, malnutrition, and poverty, and increasing child and adult health, improving child and adult health, and other outcomes. And it points out that these outcomes would be at deep risk if the program were weakened or subjected to demonstration projects based on misconceptions or stereotypes. The key purposes of SNAP, defined in the statute, are to address hunger among low-income households that suffer from from limited purchasing power to assist those households in obtaining a more nutritious diet, to bolster normal channels of trade, and to strengthen the agricultural economy. The first set of research findings summarized in my written testimony is that SNAP is fulfilling these core purposes, and in particular, it boosts food purchasing power for needy Americans and thereby reduces significantly the prevalence of food insecurity and malnutrition. By doing so, the research shows, SNAP produces important positive effects on health, on mental health, on child development, on employability, and other desirable outcomes. The positive impacts on child health are particularly notable, and those effects can be long-lasting. For example, a recent compelling report says that the exposure to SNAP in utero or in early childhood reduces the incidence of metabolic syndrome in adulthood, reduces obesity, hypertension, diabetes, and heart disease. SNAP and its impacts, moreover, reach a very broad and diverse population of rural, urban, and suburban people in need. 70% of recipients live in households with minor children, 11% in households with seniors, 18% in households with people with disabilities. Many beneficiaries are struggling veterans, and in many ways the program has become a work support program. When the adults in the household are not seniors or persons with disabilities, they typically are working, albeit at low wages, or are very recently unemployed. Among SNAP households with at least one working-age adult not receiving disability benefits, more than half have a member who works while receiving SNAP, and more than 80% work either in the year prior or the year after receiving SNAP. And these rates are even higher for SNAP households with children in them. And as we've learned most profoundly in the Great Recession, SNAP is very responsive to national or local economic downturns. SNAP not only reduces hunger, it alleviates poverty and supports family economic stability. According to one new analysis, SNAP lifted 10 million people above the poverty line in 2012. And exposure to SNAP in early childhood increases women's economic self-sufficiency, with greater high school graduation rates, higher earnings, lower rates of welfare receipt in adulthood. There is one serious SNAP shortcoming, and that's its inadequate benefit levels. But the nation has just run a large natural experiment with more adequate SNAP benefits, and the early research shows that it worked. The American Recovery and Reinvestment Act began an increase in benefits in April 2009, a boost that was cut off in late 2013. While it was in effect, research shows, the boost reduced food insecurity and improved the health of young children. But there needs to be more extensive research on the impact of the ARA boost on food insecurity and health. It's disconcerting how little interest there has been about this in the research community. And finally, I'll just summarize quickly some examples from my written testimony of recent policy changes, federal and state, that should be evaluated for their impact on hunger and on SNAP's effectiveness. Last year's Farm Bill created pilots to provide incentives for SNAP consumers' purchases of fruit and vegetables. As Mr. Arnold indicated, the Farm Bill also created a substantial demonstration project for 10 states' innovative employment and training strategies. The improvements made last year in the federal child care program should be evaluated to see if more work-supporting child care will lead to higher rates of food security as well as less joblessness. And the President's proposal to help states streamline SNAP processes for seniors could provide evidence of ways to improve the far too low senior SNAP participation rate and thereby lower their food insecurity and health costs. And last, as more states adopt higher state minimum wages, the federal minimum wage in other states are lagging behind, but that provides a natural opportunity to examine the evidence that higher minimum wages can be a significant solution to food insecurity and also bring down SNAP participation rates. So in conclusion, SNAP's fundamentally sound and successful. There are ways to make it even better. Indeed, there's already a body of research on this that I haven't been able to do full justice to today, but I hope the subcommittee will explore that existing body of research and where it leads further.
Thank you, Mr. Weill. Mr. Everett, Mr. Sullivan, please proceed.
Chairwoman Walorski, Ranking Member McGovern, and other members of the subcommittee. Thank you for inviting me to participate in today's hearing. I am talking to you today because the impact of social programs has been the focus of much of my academic research. And recently, I co-founded the Wilson Sheehan Lab for Economic Opportunities, a research center at the University of Notre Dame that implements impact evaluations to identify innovative, effective, and scalable programs that help the disadvantaged move to self-sufficiency. We work with some of the largest private providers of services to the poor in the country, such as the Catholic Charities Network, as well as state and local agencies. While these frontline providers are driven by compassion and motivation for helping the poor, most of them design and launch programs without solid evidence of effectiveness. The same could be said of many national programs, most of which are not evaluated or are evaluated with unreliable methods. One of the greatest advances in the social sciences in recent decades is the development and application of methods that allow us to determine whether social programs are having their intended effect. The gold standard of these approaches is the randomized controlled trial. Nowadays, gathering evidence is commonplace in many sectors. The medical profession runs tens of thousands of experiments each year to test the effectiveness of new interventions. These experiments have led to vast improvements in healthcare all across the globe. Shouldn't the same commitment to proven effectiveness apply to our social programs? Using evidence to steer resources towards the most effective programs would allow us to do more good with the limited resources available. Despite its size and importance, there is little hard evidence of the impact of SNAP. There is some promising quasi-experimental evidence showing that in utero exposure to the food stamp program is associated with increased birth weight and lower rates of obesity and heart disease in adulthood. But this evidence is for those exposed to food stamps in the late 1960s and early 1970s. There is a clear need for rigorous experimental evidence of the impact of SNAP in its current form. Evaluating SNAP can be challenging given its structure. It is much easier to conduct experiments when a program is rolled out, expanded, or changed in significant ways, or when the program is not made available to all those who might be eligible. SNAP is an entitlement program that has been around for more than 5 decades, and there has been relatively little experimentation with program rules. I applaud this subcommittee's efforts to generate more evidence to guide the future of nutrition policy. There are a number of strategies that can help develop a strong base of evidence and improve policy. Let me highlight just a few. First, policymakers should incentivize innovation. Programs can't be built on evidence of effectiveness if there is no evidence. The most innovative ideas for social programs frequently come from states and local providers, but they need funds to experiment with new ideas. The most recent Farm Bill made important strides towards encouraging innovation by authorizing $200 million to support pilot projects designed and implemented by state agencies to reduce SNAP dependency and encourage work. These grants create a pipeline of innovative programs that, if proven effective, can be scaled up to ensure broad impact. Second, programs need to be rigorously evaluated. Otherwise, there is no way to know whether the program is being implemented correctly and having its intended effect. If a funding agency does require an evaluation, it often does not require the evaluation to employ the best experimental or quasi-experimental methods possible, which limits the extent to which this evidence can shape future policy. Third, researchers need greater access to administrative data. Collecting survey data for an evaluation can be an expensive proposition. In many instances, administrative records already collect information on key outcomes, such as employment, earnings, program participation, and many others. But these data are often not available for evaluation purposes. Some cities and states have established administrative data repositories that can be used for evaluation, but there needs to be a national effort. The Ryan-Murray Act represents an excellent step towards greater access to data. This legislation would create a commission to study how administrative data might be compiled in order to facilitate research and evaluation. This would make possible countless studies of government programs, resulting in the design of more effective policies. Advances in technology and data collection have greatly expanded opportunities to implement high-quality evaluation of social programs. By encouraging innovation and evaluation, and by targeting support at interventions shown to be successful, Policymakers will ensure that our social programs are more effective at helping vulnerable populations get ahead. We at the Wilson Sheehan Lab welcome this transformation in the way we fight poverty in America. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sullivan. And I do want to get to Mr. Everett. Please proceed with your testimony. After that, we are going to break to vote and come back for questions. So, Mr. Everett?
Thank you, Chairwoman Walorski, Ranking Member McGovern, and members of the Subcommittee on Nutrition for the opportunity to speak before you today. My name is Jeremy Everett. I'm the director of the Texas Hunger Initiative at Baylor University. THI is a collaborative capacity building project that develops and implements strategies to end hunger through research, policy, and community engagement. Headquartered at Baylor University with 12 regional offices across the state, THI convenes federal, state, and local government stakeholders with nonprofits, faith communities, and business leaders to create an efficient system of accountability that increases food security and is an evidence-based collaborative model, a model we call informed engagement. Informed engagement is a cyclical process of research informing on-the-ground strategy and subsequently on-the-ground strategy informing research. This process leads to evidence-based solutions that have the potential to make federal nutrition programs more efficient for the state and more impactful for low-income Americans. Our work within local communities across the state is guided by three core assumptions. First, hunger and poverty are too complex for sectors to address independently of one another. Second, public and private partnerships are an effective means for coordinating access to SNAP and other federal nutrition programs within a larger continuum of care. And third, research and evaluation provide a foundation for practical evidence-based solutions. Assumption one, hunger and poverty are too complex for sectors to address independently of one another. When the Texas Hunger Initiative began in 2009, we identified thousands of organizations working tirelessly to address food security in Texas. However, there were still more than 5 million Texans living in food insecure households. A big reason for this is they were not coordinating with each other. We realized that our first priority needed to be building public and private partnerships. Assumption two is that public and private partnerships are an effective means for coordinating access to SNAP and other federal nutrition programs within a larger continuum of care. In congruence with Baylor's aspiration of informed engagement, THI and its partners across the state of Texas are fostering public and private partnerships to maximize the efficiency of nutrition programs and develop local solutions to address hunger. Public and private partnerships are collaborations among state agencies and local organizations that bridge local, state, and federal resources to maximize the efficiency of programs while increasing community ownership. Our third assumption, research and evaluation provide a foundation for practical, evidence-based solutions. As a part of the informed engagement process, our work building public and private partnerships are continuously evaluated. Being at a university, we're in a unique position to engage in research and evaluation that is both collaborative and actionable. Every project we engage in is informed by existing research on food security and evaluated by our research team. Because community-based initiatives are innovative and often in a continuous state of development, we utilize aspects of developmental evaluation. Our goal is to make sure that our programmatic decisions are informed by research and evaluation, and that research and evaluation are informed by what we're doing programmatically. When public and private partnerships are carefully informed by research and evaluation, stronger networks are likely formed between clients and local organizations, thus building a foundation for increased social capital for low-income families. Social capital, a measure of trust, reciprocity, and social networks, is positively associated with household food security, independent of household-level socioeconomic factors. Thus, social capital is a complement to anti-hunger and anti-poverty programs because it strengthens the assets and resources that exist within disadvantaged communities. Stronger networks, social capital, and federal nutrition programs are all important components for building food security. Our efforts at the Texas Hunger Initiative demonstrate informed engagement and are building a foundation for evidence-based solutions. We believe that allocating resources to the hunger-free communities line in the Farm Bill will expand the capacity of informed engagement and public and private partnerships, resulting in greater local coordination, strengthened social networks for low-income Americans. And when public and private partnerships are carefully informed by research and evaluation, stronger networks are likely formed between clients and local organizations, thus building a foundation for increased social capital for low-income families. We believe that this has the potential to reduce the need for long-term federal assistance. When we invest in these efforts and build them up on scalable, evidence-based solutions, we exhibit both the willpower and the know-how to build public and private infrastructure to strengthen families and build communities. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Everett. I'd like to advise members that a series of votes has been called. I anticipate this series of votes to last approximately 20 minutes. I would ask that the members return to the hearing as quickly as possible from voting. This hearing will stand in recess, subject to the call of the chair. The committee will come back to order, and we're actually moving into the question portion. So I would like to direct my first question to Mr. Sullivan. In reviewing existing SNAP research funded by the Department of Agriculture, is it sufficient enough to improve the program and identify evidence-based solutions in the world today that we live in?
Thank you for the question. So I mentioned in my written testimony a number of challenges in evaluating the SNAP program broadly. These challenges arise because the program is an entitlement that is available universally, and so we lack a group to which we can compare the effects of the program. So one might want to compare the effects of the food stamp program for participants to those that look like the participants but don't participate. But eligible households, because it's an entitlement, are eligible to receive the benefits. So what this means is that we're limited in the kinds of rigorous studies that we can do of the food stamp program. One of the easy ways to address that would be to run pilot projects that we can evaluate in an experimental way, and that is in the kind of things that have been done and encouraged and funded by the most recent Farm Bill. So pilot projects are a nice way to test additional features. Unfortunately, they're limited in terms of the ability to test the overall program. If I wanted to test the overall program, I'd rewind the clock to 1964 when we were first rolling this out, and roll it out gradually and construct a rigorous research design around that rollout. But unfortunately, I can't roll back the clock, so we can't do that.
And this committee has been consistent from the start that we believe in SNAP. We're not looking at tearing apart a program. We're looking at the areas of, how can we make this work better? And, some of the things that all of you have talked about this morning. Do you believe, is there space within the program to do an evaluation?
The current program? I mean, absolutely, and I think that, the idea of pilots are a great place to start, right? Because you can allow the innovators, those at the local level, to experiment with new ideas and test them rigorously to find out what works and what doesn't amongst these new ideas. And then once you start with a pilot and you build a body of evidence on what works, you can scale those effective programs up, and you can run a larger demonstration project. And then once you build and evaluate it again, and once you build the evidence on the effectiveness of a demonstration project, now let's scale it up to a larger level. I mean, maybe it becomes state waivers or another way to test this on a broad scale. There'll be much broader support for those kinds of initiatives if they're built off of evidence at the local level that these kinds of changes really work.
I appreciate it. And Mr. Everett, your work extends well beyond SNAP to actually address hunger in Texas. Can you talk a little bit about what it is you're researching and evaluating?
We have an interdisciplinary research agenda. So one of the things we research is what we call the Community Partner Program, looking at how we can incorporate private organizations, nonprofits, and congregations into becoming access points for the SNAP program or Medicaid, Medicare, CHIP, and so forth. On the local level, we've been able to do this by reducing the number of health and human service offices we have around the state, which has saved us a lot of money as a state in bureaucratic spending. So we're looking at that. We test that to find out what makes a good community partner organization, what makes a good access point, and what organizations make good, build strong social networks for low-income families so that we can hopefully get them into gainful employment. We look at the Summer Mills program, how we can help organizations, sponsoring organizations around the country be able to operate that program in the black. A lot of organizations lose money. If they're losing money when running that program, then oftentimes that requires additional investment, maybe from other organizations like foundations, or it could cost them to get out of the program altogether. And so we run programs there. We've tested nutrition levels of the Breakfast in the Classroom program and its potential impacts on academic performance. You name it. We have it's a pretty wide range of evaluation projects.
I appreciate it, thank you. And I would now recognize Ranking Member McGovern for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Chairwoman. First of all, thank you all for being here, and this is very interesting. Mr. Everett talked about better coordination. I agree. I mean, I wish within the federal government, all the relevant agencies that deal with issues of hunger and poverty were better coordinated, would meet on a regular basis, and talk about how they can work better together. I also wish, and it's one of the reasons why I've been urging the White House to do a White House conference on food, nutrition, and hunger, to try to bring everybody who has a role in this together and lock them in a room and say, okay, what is the plan here? And I'm all for evidence-based, evaluation. But we're talking about a program here in SNAP that has one of the lowest error rates of any federal program. This is not a program that is fraught with waste and abuse. It's actually a program that is run actually pretty well. And the majority of people on the program are kids, senior citizens, and members of the disabled community. And then of those who work, the majority work, and some people work full-time, and they still earn so little that they're on the benefit. So those people don't need another evidence-based study to try to incentivize them to work. Those people are working. I think what they probably want is a study as to, what would an increase in the minimum wage to a livable wage mean for them, so that their work actually pays something, so that they don't have to rely on public assistance. And so I think it's important to kind of define the context here. And look, I see the reality when I'm back home, or if I go to various places around the country. The fact is that the benefit, as Mr. Weill pointed out, is inadequate. I mean, most SNAP families end up at food pantries and food banks before the month is out. And it's not that they don't know how to, budget their money properly. It is not a very generous benefit, contrary to what you might hear on some talk radio shows. And I have 2 sisters who are school teachers in Massachusetts. A lot of the kids that come to class on Monday, it's clear that they haven't eaten most of the weekend. They can't concentrate. And so, Mr. Sullivan, you referred to the thousands of studies of medical treatments, including drugs. And I think a SNAP is providing medicine for people, because I do think food is medicine. But I want more research on the adequacy of the dosage. Isn't that an important research goal within the framework that you're describing? Isn't that indeed the most urgent research question?
So I would agree that it would be wonderful to study what the impact of food stamp generosity is on the well-being of recipients. Mr. Weill mentioned a natural experiment was when we expanded the generosity in 2009 temporarily. And the challenge is what kind of evidence can we collect when we do those kinds of things? We expanded food stamp generosity at the same time that a lot of other things were going on in the macroeconomy that made it difficult for low-income families. So as a result, it's really challenging to determine exactly what the impact of that expansion was.
But I can tell you, when we took back that food stamp generosity, when the Recovery Act monies ran out, I think all of us heard from constituents, who complained that food prices didn't go down, that they could afford less, and that they were ending up relying more and more on food banks. And I guess I'm interested in making sure, especially amongst our kids, that that they're not only that they have adequate food, but also they have access to nutritious food.
Yeah, so I think that, and so I agree with you, but let me be clear on what I'm pushing here is that I'd like to have the solid scientific evidence that shows that food stamps is improving nutritional outcomes, so that we can put an end to this debate, a question that, some people are saying that it's effective, some people are saying that it's not. If we can generate the kind of evidence that will convince policymakers and other stakeholders that it is clearly effective, then it's much easier to design policies and expand them.
No, and look, I don't disagree with what you're saying here. But I think that The problem here is I think there are a lot of members of Congress who are instinctively against SNAP because they think it creates dependency, when I think the evidence is the opposite. But I do think an important question here is whether or not the benefit that we currently have is adequate to meet the nutritional needs of families and especially our kids. And I don't think it is. And I see that evidence when I go to schools and I see kids that show up on a Monday morning unable to concentrate because they're hungry. So I mean, I think that's an area we should be focusing attention on. I thank the Chairwoman.
I now recognize Mr. Abraham for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairwoman. What we've been talking about today is more of just counting the number of people receiving the benefits, which would seem like it could be very expensive. Mr. Sullivan, you mentioned in your testimony that better administrative data might be a solution. Can you expand on that a little bit?
Sure. So there are lots of administrative data that give us information on SNAP and many other programs that allow us to track participation in the program and other things like earnings, employment, et cetera. And what I was commenting on in terms of administrative data is that this provides an incredible opportunity to determine the impact of these programs. So, for example, if I want to know what the effect of SNAP is on employment, I could write a survey and track down SNAP participants and non-participants, but that would be really expensive and hard to do. But administrative data from UI earnings records already has those outcomes for us. And if I were able to have access to those kinds of data, it would make it much easier for us to conduct these kinds of experiments. And that, when I referred to the Ryan Murray Act, that is an effort to create a commission to really explore broader ways to create greater access to this. And I think the end result of that is that we have better information, and from better information, we end up having better policy.
Mr. Everett, what does administrative data play in your field?
It plays an important role because we're constantly evaluating data that the state collects or that the federal government collects. Oftentimes, the data sets don't match. And so Mr. Sullivan and I were discussing earlier, we have dedicated research analysts who just clean data to make sure that it's accurate. So that our projections that we're making as a state or as a federal government as it relates to nutrition programs are accurate. And so it's a core componency. So more transparency would increase our ability to serve the state and the federal government more fully.
Okay, thank you. Most SNAP research now is paid for with discretionary funding and our discretionary appropriations, and as recently as 2016, the Agriculture Appropriations Bill favored reported by the Appropriations on July 8th, and it included a rider to increase oversight on research, and this goes to Mr. Sullivan, Mr. Barron. In reviewing the existing SNAP research funded by the Department of Agriculture, in your opinion, is it sufficient?
There are other areas, as I mentioned in my written statement and in my oral statement, like welfare, where there have been a large body of rigorous evaluations that have built a sizable body of strategies that have been shown effective in a variety of goals, including increasing workforce participation and success of program participants. In SNAP, there have not been a body of such studies. There have been some, and there have been an increasing number in recent years, including the 10-state pilot that's going forward, that have been scientifically rigorous enough to provide a credible answer about whether the program worked or not. In an area that Congressman McGovern touched on, there was recently one of the, I think, positive examples of a recent rigorous randomized trial that was done, sponsored by the Department of Agriculture, was of providing summer electronic benefits for children, because they don't get foods, they don't get school lunches during the summer, so this was a way of expanding it. And it was tested in a rigorous evaluation to determine the effect on child hunger, and it did find an effect. So, but the number of studies like that are done within SNAP to try to identify what works is very small compared to other areas, literally a handful. So this would, I think, there's a need for a much more robust effort at innovation at the state and local level coupled with rigorous evaluation.
Mr. Sullivan, real quick, you got about 30 seconds.
So I would agree with Mr. Barron. I might start by just saying that there is a lot of good information and research out there on the SNAP program. We know a lot about the SNAP program, like what drives changes in caseloads and that the macroeconomy plays a large role. We know that SNAP is fairly well targeted and that a lot of people who receive SNAP are at or near the poverty line. But when I say things like there isn't a lot of hard evidence on the impact of SNAP, I'm talking about what Mr. Barron was referring to, that there's a lack of this kind of experimental evidence that would provide the convincing evidence that would shape policy.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll yield back.
I now recognize Ms. Delbene.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thanks to all of you for being here with us today. Many of you have talked about the efforts of finding and using evidence in the SNAP program, and in my state of Washington, we've already developed a number of effective strategies to help families achieve self-sufficiency. Washington's employment and training program has helped over 11,000 people find jobs, and in one study, less than half of those enrolled in the program remain on government assistance 2 years after they enrolled. So Washington's program, I think, has been a model, and we used it as a model to help create the 10 employment and training pilots that were in the Farm Bill. I was wondering, Mr. Weill, if you can explain further how employment and training programs might be able to help us develop further strategies to help expand opportunity and make sure that we reduce hunger at the same time.
Thank you, Congresswoman. So Washington has one of the strongest SNAP E&T programs in the country. It's done a much better job than most other states. It's done, there are a number of attributes. Most important one in some ways is there's really strong coordination with other agencies, with community colleges, with nonprofits and state agencies. And also the state has used the available federal money. We're talking about work demonstrations up here, and we've all talked about the 10 state pilots, but the fact is that there are large streams of federal money that a lot of states, unlike Washington, aren't really using. Most of the federal E&T discretionary money is used by 5 states. So we need more states to follow the examples of states like Washington that have done a good job. There's a lot of evidence, not all the evidence in the world has to be from randomized control trials. There were, as Mr. Sullivan's written testimony indicated, there are good workarounds for a lot of these research problems. We need, the problem is getting states to pick up on what's proven. And the evidence the research evidence that the states are good at picking up on what's proven is not itself overwhelming.
Mm-hmm. I also wanted to follow up on something you mentioned in your testimony. You talked about the primary goals of SNAP being addressing hunger and malnutrition, assisting households obtain a more nutritious diet, strengthening the agricultural economy, and doing so through normal channels of trade. Can you elaborate on what the research tells us about how SNAP is meeting those goals today?
So as my written evidence suggests in more detail, we know that SNAP reduces food insecurity, both among children and adults, and it does that by increasing their purchasing power. So it's accomplishing that goal. As Mr. McGovern suggests, it could do more if benefits were more adequate, but it's certainly achieving the goal to a significant degree that's important to the society. It's also, since all SNAP benefits run through grocery stores, big box stores, farmers markets, it's doing that through normal means of commerce, and it is a boost to the agriculture economy. So it's meeting its statutory goals and doing so in a very effective way.
And what else should we be studying? Do you have other ideas on things we aren't looking at today that we should be looking at?
Well, there are a lot of state choices and state activities that some states do and other states don't that get in the way of eligibility and benefits. So just as one example, some states use the very outdated, very low federal assets test, which keeps a lot of particularly seniors, but also working families out of the program. but a lot of states have chosen the option to do away with or substantially raise that asset test. One important thing that could be looked at is the impact of the asset tests on keeping working families and others out of the program, on reducing participation and hurting food security. There are state choices on income levels, on on certification periods, how long people get into the program for before they have to go through difficult bureaucratic means to get recertified for a second period. A bunch of things that vary from state to state that are natural experiments in many ways to show what's most effective and what isn't.
Thank you. Thank you. I'll yield back.
Thank you. Chair recognizes Mr. Yoho for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I appreciate you all being here to discuss this so we can reform the nutritional program so we get the best benefit for the end user and that the American taxpayers' dollars go to wise use. Mr. Weill, you just said that, you know, the studies determine that SNAP has decreased food insecurity. Is that, I think I just heard you say that?
Yes, that's correct.
No offense, but those are kind of common sense things that if we put more money into the system in people's hands, it's going to increase their buying and purchasing power. Have we done beyond that to saying, why are people in that situation in the first place? And I know we're coming out of a terrible economic time, but what is the breakdown to where people are in that and we have such a high number of people on food assistance? And again, I've said this in this committee before, being a veterinarian, I've dealt with every species of animals, whether it's birthed or raised. The parent raises that child or that offspring and then teaches it the way to go and weans it. We're the only species on the planet that seems going backwards. Are we looking at the bottom, the underlying cause of why we're here and having so many people on nutritional programs?
Right. So the very, very large majority of people on the program are people with disabilities, are seniors, and are working parents.
All right, if we took that category out and we looked at able-bodied people and not looked at, you know, the poor, the elderly, the disabled, but look at that one group of individuals, how much does that account for the spending on nutritional programs?
Well, I don't know off the top of my head what percentage of the SNAP budget goes to households with working age adults who aren't disabled, but I can tell you that significantly more than a majority of those adults who aren't disabled on SNAP are currently working, but they're working at very low wages and possibly only part-time because they'd like to work full-time but can't, or they've worked very recently and they're now unemployed for 2 or 4 months and they're receiving SNAP in relatively short periods of unemployment. So I think, you know, in some ways the public view of most able-bodied adult SNAP recipients as people who haven't worked for very long periods of time is very inaccurate. The number of people who aren't currently working and are on SNAP but working at low wages, or who weren't working, who were working recently, or who will be going back to work soon. The number of people who don't fall in that category is relatively small.
Is anybody else?
But it's a large program. There are a lot of people in that category, but it's a small proportion of the program.
Okay.
Sure, I'd love to address that. You know, I mean, right now we have less social mobility than we've had since 1929 as a nation. So I think part of the problem is definitely wages. So in Texas right now we have the most people on working in minimum wage conditions that are utilizing the SNAP program than any other state. So the program has become essentially a work support program. The conditions in many of our communities are such where educational outcomes, the issue that we're dealing with SNAP or with hunger is merely a part of the larger umbrella issue of poverty. And as you know, poverty is incredibly complex and people are poor for a myriad of reasons. But access to quality health care, access to quality education, access to housing, and so on and so forth, all have direct impact on the outcomes in terms of utilization of the SNAP program.
I'm going to reclaim my time because what you described is a situation where it's an ongoing process, and we're not going to work ourselves out of this until we change something. And we've had the war on poverty for 50 years. We put $20 trillion into that, and we're going backwards in that process. Somewhere the cycle has to be brought, and I'm all for helping people get into a system, get them educated, get them to move beyond that so that we break that cycle. But what I hear on these programs is we're just following the same thing over and putting more money in there. We've got to break that cycle, and that's what I'm looking for. The panels, as they come in here, how do we break this cycle? How do we get beyond this? You know, as you guys, well, I don't want to get into that. That's where, you know, I would really like to hear from you guys. And let me ask you this. I mean, you're in a faith-based organization, right?
Yeah, Baylor University, yeah.
Yeah. The Texas Hunger Initiative.
Yeah.
Do you feel that that's an integral part of helping people get food outside of government? You know, if it's faith-based versus just a government program, do you see a need for those?
Absolutely. I think one of the things that I mentioned in my opening remarks was that the importance of public and private partnerships. I think when you have organizations like congregations and local nonprofits that have an intrinsic interest in ensuring that people not only have access to benefits, but also have access to gainful employment, because that is a part of their mission and purpose, that is
I'm going to have to cut you off because I'm out of time. Thank you for your answer.
And to the members, I apologize. We have another set of votes coming. Mr. Aguilar, Chair recognizes you for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairwoman, and I want to thank the panel for joining us here today. This question is for Mr. Weill. I'm looking at March 2015 data for CalFresh recipients in my county of San Bernardino in California. In the first quarter, there were 397,000 people in my county on CalFresh, living in 177,000 households. My question is, how would an evidence-based solution assure me that these folks, whether they are children, elderly, or disabled, would benefit from evidence-based solutions to SNAP alone? And I want to be sure that the people in my community are receiving the assistance that they need to avoid food insecurity.
Right. So I'm not a researcher, but I would disagree a little bit with Mr. Sullivan. I think there are workarounds for randomized control experiments that can be done in the SNAP program to show how effectively or not effectively the program's reaching people in your county. And those would include the proportion of the estimated eligible people in the county who are actually participating as compared to surrounding counties. It would include looking at data on how quickly people who are, when they apply for benefits, most people are really desperate. They've just lost jobs, lost other sources of income, how quickly people get into the program, which can be done through administrative data, and I know California has, some counties in California are very slow in processing applications, looking at the quality of the employment and training program in the county, and other aspects of really discretionary county decisions and policies in the county, and comparing them not just to other states, but to surrounding counties in California. And I'll be glad to provide your staff with data sources as to how to get that in your county.
Thank you. I appreciate it, sir. Mr. Barron, earlier you cited Riverside County as an example of this evidence-based solutions from something that you mentioned, studies that happened in the 90s. And I'm not sure if it's the best example. The study cited participation rates of 57 and 60% respectively for education and training, but parents are only a small part of the equation, as the panelists have mentioned and Mr. McGovern mentioned. What about kids that receive benefits, seniors, veterans under care, people with disabilities, and those living with individuals with disabilities? I just question the actual number of people who benefited. And I would also say, just for context, that region, which is just a few miles away from my district, had an unemployment rate of near 15% a few years ago. So I would question the long-term benefits of the reforms and the programs that you cite.
Well, it's a good question. In Riverside, one thing that was unique about that was that it was a scientifically rigorous study, and it had a 5-year follow-up. And there was no question that it produced a meaningful improvement in people's life outcomes, an improvement of about 40% in their employment and earnings. and because they were employed and earning, it produced sizable savings to the government of several $1,000s per person in food stamps and welfare. It was also not, it was done with a very wide slice of welfare participants. And in Los Angeles County, where it was replicated, it was implemented for every welfare participant in all of Los Angeles, and also shown to be effective. Los Angeles County at the time had the largest welfare population in the United States. So for that particular study, this particular approach of moving people from welfare into the workforce was demonstrated credibly in one county and then demonstrated credibly on a very large scale for a large number of people, single-parent long-term welfare recipients, as well as two-parent participants, to have large effects. That's why it had such an important policy impact.
I appreciate it. Mr. Everett, your colleague, Mr. Kunz, testified before our subcommittee in April, and he mentioned some of the great things that you guys are doing to increase SNAP participation. Do you rely on volunteers for all of your outreach, or do you work with the state of Texas to get some SNAP outreach funding for materials?
Well, we have 12 regional offices with field staff that work with about 1,200 community partner organizations. So many of those community partner organizations might have case managers that are employed by their local nonprofit that act as a navigator for SNAP accessibility. So.
Do each of those regional offices have full-time?
They do. They do.
Full-time staff members?
They do.
Within your, okay, I'm sorry. I'm out of time. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you. The chair recognizes Congressman Davis for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for convening this hearing. And I appreciate the ranking member, Mr. McGovern, who's very passionate about these issues. And I just want to see how fast he'd turn around when he heard his name.
You got my attention.
Well, this is a great opportunity to hear some innovative approaches. Some of the longest debate that we had during our Farm Bill negotiations were obviously related to the programs that funded our food and nutrition programs. And I'm glad to hear many of the witnesses today have read your testimony, and thanks for being here. I'm from Illinois, and part of the Farm Bill, we authorized 10 pilot programs to be able to look at a valuable first step to building a solution for making some of the meaningful improvements that many of you are talking about. And I'm excited to see that Illinois is a grantee. I frankly didn't think that our governor at the time, who's no longer governor, would actually make the application. I'm glad he did. I actually had to apologize for calling him out in the newspaper. But can, Mr. Barron, what advice would you give a state like Illinois to ensure that this pilot program is successful?
I think one of the, there have been a lot of studies that have been done, not specifically in food stamps, but in other areas, in unemployment insurance, there was a demonstrations that have been sponsored by HHS of employment programs for hard-to-employ populations. There have been a number of studies, rigorous studies that have been done in welfare to work that have identified, in a few cases, not many, some highly effective approaches for increasing the workforce success of low-income people. If I were a state or advising a state, my suggestion would be to look very carefully at what has been learned in those prior studies. There are a few programs, even if they're in different areas, but with low-income populations, that have produced really large impacts on people's life outcomes, and to see whether adaptations of those programs could, for a food stamps population could be tested. So the short answer is I would look to the prior research to identify what is most promising and try that in food stamps.
Excellent. Thank you. Thanks for your advice, and we may have our new administration in Illinois reach out for some more suggestions on how to be successful. Mr. Sullivan, in your testimony, you talked about how the structure of SNAP makes it difficult to gather evidence on the real effectiveness of the program. And if you've already mentioned this before I got here, or if you mentioned it to a previous question, I apologize for the redundancy, so feel free to move even beyond with some other suggestions. But from your perspective, what changes should be made in order to get the most accurate data? And how can we take what you're learning, quantify results, and move them into the public policy realm?
Thank you. Let me address the second one because I think it's closely related to what Mr. Barron was saying, and that is that at the Wilson Sheen Lab, we sometimes refer to this as innovate, evaluate, replicate. So these pilots are an effort to incentivize innovation. So we see state agencies experimenting with new things. We need to rigorously evaluate these pilots, and that's what's being done, and we need to continue to encourage that kind of rigorous evaluation. And then use that research to inform future decisions. So if the pilot is working, then we use that information to scale it up. We said these are the kinds of programs that are worth investing more dollars in. If the pilot is not working, that doesn't necessarily mean that we shut it down right away. The first question when we're working with an agency doing evaluation, the first question we ask when we get modest or negative evidence is why? Why is the evidence not as promising as we had hoped? And can the evidence help us steer or redirect the program in a way to make it better? So the evidence is an opportunity to improve the impact of the programs that we're designing. Now, if a program continues to demonstrate or lack to demonstrate effectiveness, then that's when we start thinking about reallocating resources towards programs and pilots that have actually demonstrated real impact.
Excellent. Are there any other ideas that you may have that we have yet to ask you a question on that you feel may be helpful for us to develop a new policy and more innovative policies?
Well, I think the pilots are a nice place to start, and what I would encourage is the opportunity to build off of that. And there are other models in other areas, in other agencies. The U.S. Department of Education has a good model they call a tier-based model that once there is a pilot that has demonstrated effectiveness, there's funds available to scale that pilot up and then evaluate it again. And then when there continues to be evidence of effectiveness, then we scale it up even further, say in a large-scale demonstration project. So there's this gradual accumulation of evidence so that we can support better policy.
Thanks. The chair now recognizes Congresswoman Lumego-Sham for 5 minutes. And again, I apologize, we're up against another vote.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And as we continue to look at ways to make a program, SNAP, that I really care about and believe in, as effective as possible in meeting its goals and doing what I think it ought to do, which is help this country eradicate hunger, particularly given that I'm from a state that's, I bet every one of the members of the subcommittee and the entire Ag Committee could repeat New Mexico statistics, because you just have to say that New Mexico's got one of the worst hunger problems in the country for both children and adults. And we went from last to this year to fourth, so that's in the right direction, but it's still deplorable that my constituents face hunger every single day. And I recognize that this is a program whose intent and ability to do something about that is meaningful. I also, as a longtime state bureaucrat, love, Mr. Barron, any ideas that incentivize me as a policymaker in that regard to think of ways to improve programs, and if there are savings, to keep it. But for, and here is my big but, that in the context of states, particularly like mine, who are in significant budgetary problems and are suffering from one of the weakest economies in the country, and an administration who I disagree with in terms of how they feel about any public benefits, including these, those kinds of incentives can be very counterproductive and create exactly the opposite intent, which is innovation and productive reform. And I really want you to talk to me a little bit about that, but I'm going to give you some stats to illustrate how this can go wrong. Right now in New Mexico, our proposed work requirements are for seniors and children. I want to tell you that our work requirements are also for unpaid work, which means I'm already not getting enough for childcare and housing. Now I have to volunteer in places that are far away in a state that has no public transportation, really, because we're a rural and frontier state, so we're slow to get that off the ground. And think about it in the context of all of our friends now who have often unproductive and unwanted audits in healthcare, where we incentivize the independent auditors that they get to keep anything that they find, so they find stuff that really isn't fraud, but is a mistake and really shuts down a lot of our direct care providers in the healthcare system. That's going on in New Mexico as well. And one more thing. When we're putting up barriers just in the applications process as New Mexico's looked at reforms. Now, because of those changes in the applications, most applicants wait months before they can get our computer system, which is a problem, to look at those applications. SNAP benefits processing has fallen by 23% in this design as they're reforming the program. 20,000 people lost their food benefits. The state did nothing about it, and the only way to address the delays and the barriers and the applications and the computer system and the work requirements is courts are now involved, mandating that the state do something. So that's an extreme example about how it goes completely the other way. Talk to me about some of those protections, balances, so that as we do our job to make sure that hunger doesn't get worse, and that we're focusing on supporting those constituents who need us most and who need this program most, get the services and benefits that they need.
So I think if the federal government were to incentivize state-level innovation, it would need to be done as it was done in welfare, where, and I agree with you, it needs to be circumscribed, the types of innovations that would be allowed. There would be great flexibility, but you don't want to allow experimentation that's likely to cause harm. One thing, but within that, there are probably many different strategies, useful strategies, plausible strategies that could be tested. What was done in welfare, starting in the Bush Senior administration, was that the federal government, HHS, allowed states to try their own welfare reform innovations, and required, in order to, and they waived provisions of federal law to allow those innovations, but they required a rigorous randomized trial to determine whether that innovation worked or did not work. And that's the reason why you have such a large body of scientific evidence that was built about what works in welfare. When President Clinton came into office, he said, I am going to continue the state-level waivers, the innovations that I agree with, and the ones that I disagree with.
Right, and I'm going to reclaim the 6 seconds that I have, but I really encourage this committee to remember that there are states who, even without waivers and exceptions and changes, have not done the jobs that we intend as policymakers for these programs, and we have a responsibility to require accountability in any of these kinds of designs. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. I do appreciate the panel's help in understanding how we can better balance flexibility and accountability to help our recipients climb the economic ladder. You've certainly given us plenty to think about as we continue our look at the past, present, and future of the SNAP program. No system is perfect, we understand, and we can always do better. Under the rules of the committee, the record of today's hearing will remain open for 10 calendar days to receive additional material, supplementary written responses from the witnesses to any question posed by any member. This hearing of the Committee on Agriculture, Nutrition, and Subcommittee is adjourned.